The restaurant of many orders. Imagine you're lost, deep in the mountains. The sun is fading. The air is growing colder. You've been wandering for hours with no idea which way leads home. Then, through the trees, you spot a beautiful restaurant. Warm lights glow from its windows. A fine meal seems only moments away. Relieved, you rush to the entrance. On the door, a polite message welcomes you inside. But behind that door is another. And on that door, a request. Then, another door. Another request. And another. Each one seems harmless. Each one asks for a little more. A brush of the hair. The removal of a coat. A touch of cream. A sprinkle of salt. Only when it is far too late do you realize the terrible truth. The restaurant was never preparing dinner for its guests. The guests were the dinner. Tonight, we enter one of Japan's most famous and unsettling tales. A dark fable written by Kenji Miyazawa. This is The Restaurant of Many Orders. Chapter 1. Two gentlemen lost in the mountains. Long ago, two young gentlemen from Tokyo set out on a hunting trip deep in the mountains. Both were dressed in expensive hunting clothes. Their rifles were polished to a shine, and their boots looked as though they had never touched a muddy trail. They carried themselves with the confidence of men who were accustomed to getting what they wanted. The hunt, however, was a disappointment from the very beginning. Not a single bird appeared. They searched the forest, crossed streams, and climbed steep slopes, yet hour after hour passed without finding any game. "What a dreadful place," one of them muttered. "I've spent a fortune on this trip for nothing," said the other. Their irritation grew with every step. The mountains around them seemed endless. The trees stretched high into the sky, their dark branches swaying in the wind. Then the weather began to change. Gray clouds gathered overhead. A cold wind swept through the forest, carrying with it the scent of rain. The sunlight faded. Shadows lengthened beneath the trees. The two gentlemen suddenly realized something was wrong. The guide who had led them into the mountains was nowhere to be seen. They called out to him. No answer came. They searched the trail behind them. There was no sign of him. A feeling of unease settled over them. "Which way did we come?" one asked. The other looked around nervously. Every direction seemed the same. The forest offered no clues. The truth slowly became impossible to ignore. They were lost. At first, they tried to remain calm. Surely they would find the trail again. Surely they would come across another traveler. But as the minutes passed, the wilderness grew quieter and more frightening. Then something even stranger happened. The hunting dogs that had accompanied them suddenly began to whine. The animals staggered as though they had become weak. One after another, they collapsed onto the ground. The gentleman rushed toward them in alarm, but it was too late. Within moments, the dogs lay completely still, dead. The forest fell silent. Neither man could explain what had happened. For a moment, they simply stared. Then one of them shrugged uneasily. "There's nothing we can do." The other nodded. Dogs can always be replaced. Leaving the animals behind, they continued deeper into the mountains. The cold became sharper. Their hunger grew worse. Soon, all they could think about was finding food and shelter. Hours seemed to pass. Their legs ached. Their faces were pale. Just as they began to fear they might spend the night in the wilderness, something appeared among the trees. A building. The two men stopped in disbelief. Standing in the middle of the forest was a magnificent Western-style restaurant. Its white walls gleamed against the dark woods. Large windows reflected the fading light of the evening sky. It looked completely out of place, as though it had been transported from a city and placed in the heart of the mountains. For the first time that day, the gentleman smiled. "We're saved. At last." Without hesitation, they hurried toward the building. Above the entrance, written in elegant gold letters, was a name: the Wildcat House. Beneath it was a welcoming message: "Ladies and gentlemen, please come in. No reservations required." The two men exchanged delighted glances. Their terrible day, it seemed, was finally about to improve. With renewed energy, they stepped forward and opened the door. Neither of them knew that they were walking into a trap. Chapter 2. The First Orders. The moment the two gentlemen stepped inside, they felt a wave of relief. The air was warm. The wind could no longer reach them. After hours of wandering through the cold mountains, the building felt like a sanctuary. A long hallway stretched before them. The floor was polished to a mirror-like shine, and the walls were decorated with elegant patterns. Everything about the place suggested wealth and refinement. "This is extraordinary," said one of the gentlemen. "A restaurant like this in the middle of the mountains?" replied the other. "Who would have imagined it?" Their hunger made the place seem even more inviting. At the end of the hallway stood a large door. Across it, written in gold letters, was a message: "This restaurant has many orders for its customers. Please understand this before entering." The two men paused. "Many orders?" one said. The other laughed. "It must mean they're very busy. A famous restaurant, perhaps." "That would explain it." Amused rather than concerned, they opened the door and continued on. Beyond it was another hallway, and at the end of that hallway stood another door. This time, a neatly printed sign read, "Dear guests, please comb your hair and clean the dust from your shoes before proceeding." Beside the door stood brushes and shoe cleaning tools. "Very particular, aren't they?" one gentleman remarked. "That's the mark of a first-class establishment." The two men carefully brushed their hair and cleaned their shoes. Then they moved on. The next door carried another instruction: "Please leave your rifles and ammunition here." The gentlemen exchanged glances. Reasonable enough. I suppose they don't want firearms inside the dining rooms. Without hesitation, they placed their rifles against the wall and left their ammunition beside them. The burden of the weapons was gone. So was their only means of protection. Neither noticed. Their thoughts were fixed entirely on food. Beyond that door waited another, and another sign: "Please remove your hats, overcoats, and shoes." The men laughed. This place grows more formal with every room. It must be one of the finest restaurants in the country. They removed their coats. They took off their hats. They left their shoes neatly by the door. The warmth of the building made it seem perfectly natural. Again, they continued forward. The next instruction read, "Please remove all metal objects, including watches, cufflinks, and glasses." That caused a brief moment of confusion. Why would they want that? "I'm not sure," said the other. "Perhaps metal affects the flavor of certain dishes." The explanation made little sense. Yet somehow it seemed good enough. One by one, they removed their watches, cufflinks, coins, and other metal belongings. Everything was left behind. The gentlemen were now strangely vulnerable, though neither fully realized it. At last, they reached another door. A large ceramic jar stood beside it. The sign above read, "Thank you for your cooperation. Please apply the cream in this jar to your face, hands, and feet." The two men stopped. For the first time, genuine uncertainty appeared on their faces. "Cream?" One of them lifted the lid from the jar. A sweet aroma drifted into the air. The scent was pleasant, though oddly familiar. "I suppose it's some kind of skin treatment," he said. "The mountain air is quite dry." "Perhaps that's it." Still hungry and eager to reach the dining room, they dipped their fingers into the cream. They spread it across their hands, their faces, their necks. The fragrance lingered in the air. Neither could identify, yet something about the smell made them uneasy. For the first time since entering the restaurant, silence fell between them. The excitement they had felt moments ago began to fade. In its place came a small but growing sense of discomfort. Still, neither suggested turning back. The promise of a warm meal remained too tempting. So they opened the next door and stepped forward. Waiting beyond it was another order, one far stranger than any that had come before. Chapter 3. A disturbing realization. The two gentlemen moved forward with growing unease. The restaurant no longer felt quite as welcoming as it had when they first entered. Still, they pressed on. Surely the dining room must be just ahead. Surely all of these strange instructions would soon make sense. At the next door, they found another sign. Beside it stood a large glass jar filled with a golden liquid. The sign read, "To ensure that your meal is as delicious as possible, please rub the vinegar provided over your face, hands, and feet." The two men stared at the words. For a moment, neither spoke. "Vinegar?" one finally said. "It appears so." The other opened the jar. A sharp scent immediately filled the air. There was no doubt about it. It was vinegar. The gentlemen exchanged uncertain glances. The request seemed odd, but after everything else they had already done, neither wished to admit how uncomfortable they felt. "Perhaps it's some sort of custom," one suggested. "Perhaps." Reluctantly, they rubbed the vinegar onto their skin. The liquid felt cold. The smell clung to them. When they were finished, they hurried toward the next door, eager for this strange experience to end. But what awaited them there stopped them cold. A large mound of white salt sat in a wooden bowl beside the doorway. Above it hung another sign. "Thank you for your patience. As a final preparation, please rub this salt thoroughly over your entire body." Neither man moved. The hallway became silent. The gentlemen stared at the sign, then at the salt, then at each other. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. At last, one of them spoke in a trembling voice. "Wait." The other swallowed nervously. "What is it?" The first man pointed toward the bowl of salt. His face had gone pale. "I've seen this before." A chill ran through both of them. They looked down at themselves. Their skin was covered with cream. The scent of vinegar surrounded them. Now they were being asked to rub themselves with salt. Suddenly, the pieces began to fit together. The cream, the vinegar, the salt. These were not preparations for eating a meal. They were preparations for becoming one. The realization struck them like a bolt of lightning. For several seconds, neither could breathe. Then one of them cried out, "We're the meal!" The words echoed through the hallway. The other man's eyes widened with horror. "No?
Oh.
We are." Panic exploded between them. They spun around and rushed back the way they had come. The nearest door slammed shut in front of them. They grabbed the handle. It would not move. They pulled harder. Nothing. They ran to another door. Locked. Another. Locked. Every door behind them had been sealed. The two gentlemen began pounding desperately against the wood. "Open this door! Let us out!" Their voices echoed through the empty halls. No answer came. Then, from somewhere beyond the final door ahead, they heard a sound. A faint sound, almost like whispering. The men froze. The whispering grew louder. Several voices were speaking at once. Excited voices. Hungry voices. The gentlemen pressed their ears against the door, and what they heard drained every drop of color from their faces. Have they finished applying the salt? I believe so. Excellent. They should be nicely seasoned by now. A burst of laughter followed. Not human laughter. Something sharper. Something wild. The two men stumbled backward in terror. More voices joined in. Such fine-looking guests. We rarely receive meat of this quality. The feast will be magnificent. The gentlemen could barely stand. Their knees shook uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed at them to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Then another voice spoke from beyond the door. It sounded calm, polite, almost cheerful. "Dear guests, thank you for your cooperation." The gentlemen held their breath. The voice continued. "Everything is now ready." A pause followed. Then came the words they dreaded most. "Please come in." Silence filled the hallway. The final door stood before them, and on the other side, something was waiting. Something with claws. Something with sharp teeth. Something that had been preparing dinner all evening. And that dinner was them. Chapter 4. The Wildcat House. The two gentlemen stood frozen with terror. The final door remained closed. Beyond it came the sound of restless movement. Soft footsteps. Low growls. Whispers filled with anticipation. The gentleman could barely breathe. Every strange order now made perfect sense. The cream, the vinegar, the salt. None of it had been for their comfort. They had been preparing themselves for the table. The hunters had become the hunted. One of the men let out a desperate cry and threw himself against the nearby door. It did not budge. The other joined him. Together they pounded on the wood. "Help! Please, let us out." No answer came. The hallway seemed completely cut off from the world. Only the sounds beyond the final door remained. Then a new noise emerged. A scratching sound, as though sharp claws were moving across a wooden floor. The whispers grew louder. Closer. The gentlemen backed away from the door. Their faces were pale. Their legs trembled so violently they could hardly stand. Again, the polite voice spoke. "Dear guests, there is no need to be afraid." A pause. "We have been looking forward to your arrival." The two men stared at the door in horror. Then came another voice. This one less patient, more eager. "Open the door." A second voice followed. "The meat is ready." Then another. "I'm starving." A ripple of laughter spread through the room beyond. Wild laughter. Animal laughter. The gentlemen could bear it no longer. They began to cry. Not quietly, not with dignity. They wept like frightened children. Gone was the confidence they had carried into the mountains. Gone was their pride. Gone was every trace of arrogance. Now there remained only fear. Absolute fear. Then, suddenly, a bark echoed through the building. The gentlemen lifted their heads. For a moment, they thought they had imagined it. Then came another bark, and another, louder this time, closer. The sounds of the creatures beyond the door abruptly stopped. A tense silence followed. Then, chaos erupted. Fierce growls filled the hallway. Something crashed against a wall. Glass shattered. Wild screams echoed from beyond the door. The entire building seemed to shake. The gentleman could only stare. The struggle lasted several moments. Then came the sound of rapid footsteps racing away. More crashing. More terrified cries. And then, silence. Complete silence. The final door burst open. The two men recoiled. But what rushed into the hallway was not a wildcat. It was a dog. Then another. And another. Their hunting dogs. The very dogs they had believed dead in the mountains. The animals barked excitedly and ran toward their masters. The gentlemen collapsed to their knees in relief. They were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were alive. The dogs licked their faces and barked as if urging them to leave. The two men needed no encouragement. Without looking back, they fled. Past the doors. Past the strange signs. Past the abandoned rifles and coats. Past everything. They ran until they burst out of the building and into the cold mountain air. Only then did they dare stop. The restaurant was gone. Whether it had vanished into the forest or had never truly existed at all, neither man could say. But one thing was certain. The nightmare was over. Or so they thought. For although they had escaped with their lives, something had changed. The terror they had experienced inside the Wildcat house had left a permanent mark. Their faces, twisted by fear, never completely returned to normal. No doctor could cure them. No medicine could help them. For the rest of their lives, whenever they looked into a mirror, they were reminded of the night they nearly became dinner. And from that day forward, neither gentleman ever went hunting again. Author's note. Many readers see The Restaurant of Many Orders as more than a simple horror story. The two gentlemen enter the mountains believing themselves to be hunters, confident that the lives of animals exist for their amusement. But inside the Wildcat house, their roles are reversed. For the first time, they experience the fear of becoming prey. Rather than delivering its lesson directly, the story uses dark humor, irony, and fantasy to ask a simple question. How would we feel if we were treated the way we treat those weaker than ourselves? That question has remained powerful for more than a century, which is why Kenji Miyazawa's strange and unforgettable tale continues to be read around the world today.